Hello again and welcome to another hour of Good Gardening on Backyard Farmer. I'm your host Kim Todd and I'm joined tonight with our experts from Nebraska Extension. Answering our insect questions, we have Fred Baxendale.
Good evening, Kim.
We have turf guy and weed guy sorta, Bill Kreuzer.
Sorta, good morning, or afternoon, good evening, what time is it?
We have Amy Timmerman and she is down from O'Neill to answer all those rots and spots questions.
Hi, Kim.
And Kelly Feehan in from Columbus answering horticulture questions.
Good evening, everyone.
Unfortunately, this is a taped program, so we won't be taking your calls tonight, but you can still send us an emailed question for a future show. That address is byf@unl.edu. When you send us an email, please tell us as much information as you can, including where you live, and that is where you attach your pictures. Don't forget to follow us during the week on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Backyard Farmer website. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at some samples. And Fred, you have a stinging insect.
Well, this is really a fun one. So this is commonly known as a velvet ant. In fact, it's not an ant at all. It is, in fact, a wasp. And being a wasp, it has a good defensive apparatus. So it's called a velvet ant, and it has a really interesting behavior. There we go. It has a really interesting behavior. What it does, it feeds on, it's a parasite on bees and wasps in the nest on the ground. So what it'll do, it will go in, it will find one of these bees and wasps, and it will lay some eggs in that nest. And then the velvet ant larvae will feed on those and go ahead and develop it. So it's really one of the cool wasps that we have here. Again, it has a very formidable sting, and the other thing is that it's the other name for it is cow killer wasp. And cow killer ant, and that's because apparently the sting is so formidable, it hurts so much that it will even kill a cow. So that's the urban legend.
Cool. That's
velvet
fun.
ant.
Glad you have him in his box.
Yeah, so he's taped in too.
All right,
you want to
Bill?
hold him?
No. Just in case. All right, Bill, the terrible weed.
Yep, this is some field bindweed that we're seeing a lot in our lawns right now, especially because it's hot. The lawns aren't growing as actively as they were earlier on this spring when we had a lot of rain and a little bit cooler temperatures. And this plant likes to grow when it's warm, and so we'll notice that in our ornamental beds and in our lawns, this thing just kind of takes over. And one reason it can be really difficult to control is it can grow really rapidly. It also has a real deep, extensive rhizome network. And so in a lot of states, not Nebraska, it is actually a noxious weed. It's because of those rhizomes. Simply pulling it doesn't really control it long term. It's something that probably will need a application of a herbicide when it gets really, really bad. You can try to pull it, but generally it's just going to upset the rhizomes and it's going to spread a little bit more. So most of our traditional, broadleaf herbicides will help translocate down to the roots in the fall when we spray this. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of this this particular weed in our lawns and landscapes this time of year.
All right, thank you, Bill. Amy, sadness going on over there.
Of course, I always bring sadness. So I brought some cucumbers along today, and I actually collected these here in Lincoln. And what we're seeing today on these is scab on cucumber. It's a fungal disease. Most years we don't see it nearly this severe. This year we're seeing it pretty severe because of the cool, damp weather that we've had. But the fungal infection, as you can see, causes these irregular brown spots. And at first, you can kind of see on there, it starts off as a yellow fleck, which may make you think that I'm starting to get a little bit of powdery mildew, but you give it a couple of days and you start seeing these brown specks. Typically, what we really get a complaint about from a lot of people is these specks will actually fall out and the leaf will become tattered in appearance. So I have an older leaf here that's been infected a little bit longer, and you can see how tattered the leaf looks. We were actually talking before the show started. Fred was wondering if this was bean leaf beetle feeding. And it can be really confusing to determine, is it bean leaf beetle feeding or
cucumber
beetle, or if it's scab. And the big trick is you need to look at the lesions themselves. If you can see a little bit of brown edge where that lesion was at, it falls out and you can kind of see that irregular edge. Some of these, yeah, we have cucumber beetle feeding, which also gives us that irregular pattern, but this is when people complain. We got that tattered look. Other complaints I usually get, it looks like maybe we had a hail event come through and the leaves are stripped, and we haven't had any hail for a while. What do we do for it? Usually we're going to look at good sanitation, and it's also seed transmitted. So making sure you use good, reliable seed, not holding over your seed from year to year, and avoid overhead irrigation. Now, it can affect the fruit. Cucumbers and zucchini, it's really no big deal. Pumpkins, I always joke with the master gardeners, if you get scab on pumpkins, it's a wart. You just have real high quality jack-o'-lanterns during Halloween.
All right, thanks,
So-
Amy. All right, Kelly, what do we have tonight?
Okay, well, I brought a perennial that is not blooming. Usually we have the blooming ones, but this is one of my favorite ones, and this is actually Blue False Indigo is the common name, or this one's Baptisia minor, which is a shorter one. And the reason it blooms in May, and only in May, and maybe, if it's a warm spring, maybe a week. If this spring, it bloomed for about 2 weeks because of the cool, moist weather. But the blooms, so you might be wondering, why would I want a perennial that only blooms for 2 weeks in May and then it's finished? Number one, that's a time of year when not a lot of other things are blooming, and these blooms are outstanding. They're about a foot long, sometimes longer. They're kind of bluish. But the other thing I like about the Baptisia is the fact that after it's finished blooming, it remains a beautiful shrub. The foliage is very pretty. If it's the minor one, it'll be about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. If it's the regular one, it'll be about 5 feet, maybe even 6 feet this year, as tall and as wide. But it's just a nice ornamental shrub all summer, and you don't have to deadhead it because the foliage comes up and hides those spent blossoms, and then they turn into these pods that we have here, which gives you more ornament through the summer. So Blue False Indigo, or Baptisia.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Fred, you wanted to make one quick comment.
One
before
quick
your
comment.
first
Just
picture?
for the record, the velvet ant I just showed is a her, not a him.
Oh, well,
I do know the difference.
We're so glad you straightened us out on that one. All right, you do get the first picture question, and this is our very first question of the season about carrots. This is the short and sweet variety. It has this nastiness near the top. She said she found a half-inch rusty brown wiry worm in the soil, and then she's also got these splits going on down the carrots.
Well, we can maybe address the splits first. That's really a horticultural problem, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's probably because of all the moisture we had early in the season, and it just took on too much water and it split.
Okay.
But if we can go back to is that about right?
Right, yep. I
Okay,
agree.
let's go back to this one because this is a serious problem. This is caused by carrot weevil, and it's a small weevil that lives, it's maybe a 1/4 of an inch length. And what it does, it lays its eggs, usually near the top of the carrot, as we see here. It lays its eggs underneath the skin, and then the grub, the larva, develops within that carrot and causes that kind of damage. And sometimes it's even more extensive than we see here. It's a very difficult insect to control because once the eggs have been laid under the carrot skin, it's almost impossible to get anything to it. So there's 2 approaches that we're going to use. First would be sanitation. It turns out that these weevils overwinter as adults. So good fall cleanup is really important to get all the grassy vegetation, the garden debris moved away so that they can't overwinter, right up next to where you're going to be planting your carrots. So that's one. In the spring, if that grassy vegetation starts developing, you can either spray it out or mow it off to get rid of it again, to keep that food source, those shelters. Okay, here's the key. If you want to have good carrots and you have the infestation, what you're going to need to do is put a banded application of a spray, something like Sevin or permethrin or bifenthrin, any of those products, in about a 6-inch band right over the carrots when they are about, an inch, 3/4 of an inch. So when they're very, very tiny, okay, you're going to band that over the top, and that will kill the weevils as they move in to lay their eggs, and the developing weevils. I mean, it's a very difficult insect to control. Once you have them, it's sort of a nightmare to get rid of them. I quit growing carrots for about 5 years because I had so many in my garden. So.
All right, thanks, Fred. I hope that helps that viewer. Okay, Bill. This is a viewer who has seen this sort of an approach to seeding very late in the season. If our viewers can see that erosion blanket over on the edge of that sidewalk, they're wondering whether that is an effective approach, or is that something you would recommend to a homeowner who has to do that because they're not seeing much germination through that blanket?
Yeah, the erosion blankets really can be pretty helpful. We have different types. We have kind of a wood fiber blanket. We have almost like a clean straw type blanket. Even kind of a papery white material blanket. And what they do is they help keep the seeds moist and just promote better conditions for that seed to germinate. And so you can get away with putting those down like late in the fall if you do it too late of a seeding to help protect the seedlings through the winter, and then vice versa if you put them down in the springtime to help them survive and stay wet as we dry out normally, like we normally do in the summer. This summer we were pretty wet, so you could have disease under there, so it could be an issue. But if it's a homeowner, especially in an area that they can't really water a lot, or if it's a really steep hill and you're worried about seed washing away, then using an erosion control blanket definitely can help out. And generally, you're going to see better results with the blanket than without. Sometimes you'll see them with that mesh in them, and a lot of times, even though they say it's biodegradable, I mean, during a lawn renovation, I tried to dig down, and I still find that mesh 12 years later. And so if you have that mesh, when the grass is ready to get mowed, generally I'll just pull that whole blanket right off. So it's just a temporary thing for the seedlings.
All right, thank you, Bill. Amy, we have a couple of pictures of maples, and they're from a couple of different viewers.
Okay.
The first one is silver maple. He didn't really give us much information other than the concern over the chlorotic foliage and then that browning on the tips. And I believe the second one is also kind of the browning of the foliage. That is this particular viewer has moved these in large, Autumn Blaze, Sugar Maple, Celebration, and Crimson, and they're also showing some splitting, but I think the real concern here is the spotting on those
Spotting on the
maples.
leaves. So we'll start off with this last picture with the spotting on the leaves themselves. Now, we could be dealing with a couple different things. With the wet conditions, it could easily be anthracnose, which is a fungal disease, and that always congregates right around the veins because that's where the water is going to sit. There isn't anything you can do for it. If we have major severe outbreaks and they're young trees, we can do a fungicide application in the spring. But the one concern I have is if these trees are moved in large and we're getting some bark splitting, how much of that root mass was damaged during the movement, how much root growth are we starting to get back, and we can start seeing some scorch type situations, which is very similar to what we see with that first picture where it's browning off in the very tip. That's very typical of a scorch. It's not getting enough water, and even a large tree, when you move it in, we can see a lot of that because we lost that root mass. Now, if the bark is splitting, that's going to be an indication of something else. Maples are notorious for winter cracks. They have a thinner bark, so when we have a lot of heating, cooling during the winter, and the water is starting to expand, we can get cracks. And sometimes those freeze cracks don't have any major long-term effects on the tree, but it is an opening in the tree that allows insects to move in, diseases to move in. But the other thing the crack can indicate is canker, a fungal canker or a bacterial canker. And with that, you're going to see slowly decline of branches or a side of the tree because the canker is preventing the movement of water and other nutrients in that tree, and you're going to see a slow decline of the tree. So with either one of them, you're going to want to make sure you continue good maintenance of the tree. If you're starting to see some scorch, as we get into these drier months, which, typically we say July and August is dry. If we continue with dry weather that's normal, you're going to want to give supplemental water to those trees, especially those larger trees that are moved that don't have that root mass. With those that you moved in, you got to know where that root zone is at. Usually we're going to say watering within the drip zone, but if you really cut that root mass down, you want to make sure you're watering where that root mass is at. So give it some time, give it some care. Do not fertilize. Please do not fertilize any of these trees because that just actually causes more stress on the tree at this time.
All right, thank you, Amy. Okay, Kelly, we're kind of in tree world. This is a northern Omaha viewer that has a birch.
Okay.
And this one is way light, top dyed, cut it back. They thought it would either die or cure itself, and it's dead. It's done this. What do we recommend?
It's done that. So, well, when you look at it, I mean, dying from the top back, I guess that can be a variety of things, but all I can go by is the picture here, and it looks like it's planted very deeply, for one thing, is the first thing that I noticed. And, you know, you might want to look at the other ones in the yard, and, you know, if you can kind of see a taper at the base of them, maybe those are doing better because they didn't get planted as deep. The yellowing, again, it's a sign of probably a root issue, that planting too deep can be a root problem. They look kind of chlorotic, which I see a lot of times, at least in Columbus, we see a lot of chlorotic river birch. And again, I think a combination of the soil being not well drained and too wet, and then probably some alkalinity issues on top of that. But looking at this, it looks like they're planted too deep, and the trees will probably struggle in the long run. And then the fact now that they've been topped, that just creates additional issues. So it may be time to replace it.
All right, and fall is a good time to plant.
Yes, it is.
Well, Gilman Park and Arboretum in Pierce is a wonderful place to go for a walk around a pond and check out all of the great trees, shrubs, and ornamentals. This peaceful and relaxing park was created by the City of Pierce with help from the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum and under the watchful eye of the park superintendent, Gary Zimmer. Here's Gary to give us a tour.
Gilman Park dates back to the 20s, I believe. The North Fork of the Elkhorn ran right through town here, and there was a mill on the flour mill on the dam on the North Fork of the Elkhorn, and it was run by the Gilman family. They donated all the land to the city to become a park, and that's where the name Gilman Park comes from, and also Gilman Park Arboretum. So. But we started the Arboretum in 1993 is when most of the stuff here that was planted. But other than the big trees that you see here, some of the cottonwoods, the maples, a few of the lindens, everything's been planted since 1993. Okay, we have the Arboretum entrance garden right where you come into the Arboretum. It's a very wet area, and we've had to be careful about what we put in there. We have two shrub areas. We're basically confined to just shrubs, different kinds of shrubs. We have a xeriscape garden, which is designed for low water usage that can handle drought. In another area where it's wet a lot, we have a wet mesic garden, we call it. Plants that can withstand really wet soil, standing water, but yet will also be able to handle a certain amount of drought. We have a butterfly garden, a relatively small butterfly garden. We have our trees kind of grouped along the path. We have an oak area, a maple area, linden area, birch area. So we kind of tried to keep them grouped together a little bit for people to compare the different kinds of the trees, different kinds of oaks and things like that. So yeah, the different kinds of environments is the biggest factor in making decisions on what kind of trees to plant and where to put them. So that's the biggest factor is in the site location, anyhow, the different trees, and making our tree selections, or tree and shrub selections, is what kind of different area we got. If it's a windswept area, if it's exposed, or if it's very sheltered. We're to the point now we got big enough trees that we can put understory trees in, that grow underneath the bigger trees in the shade. So, well, I love the Arboretum entrance area with the aspen trees. I love aspen trees. We have two different aspen colonies. I really like aspen trees. I love bald cypress trees. You'll see a lot of bald cypress trees out here. For one reason, we've got a lot of areas that can be very wet, and I love bald cypress trees. Diversity is the biggest thing that I'm trying to promote, and I want people to see things that will grow around here that they might not be familiar with, and we're really seeing around town the benefits of that now. I'm seeing trees pop up around town that I would like to think people got the idea out here, and I get phone calls all the time. What is that tree and where can I get it? And I like it, and that's the biggest goal I had in mind when I first started this was to have a place where people can look at these things and get some ideas for their own yards, and at the same time have a quiet and restful, relaxing morning or evening or whatever it might be.
It's great to see how much effort and care Gary and the city has put into planting and managing all of the trees and those other plants at the park, and that really is a beautiful space up there. All right, Fred, this is a North Platte viewer who has sent us a picture of an insect.
Oh.
And she's wondering, is it a good guy, and does it sting with all that stinger-like stuff? Seemed harmless.
It is definitely a good guy, and no, it doesn't sting. We'll get those two questions out of the way. You know, this is a mayfly adult. Mayflies live, the immatures live in fresh water, in ponds and in lakes, and they're really turn out to be a very, very important source of food for many of the aquatic insects and fish and other animals that are there. So it's definitely one of the good guys, and it's, you know, that's a mayfly adult.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Fred. Okay, Bill, one of the new varieties of blue grama is Blonde Ambition. And people are beginning to ask the question, is this a great option for kind of a no-mow native lawn, and especially in central Nebraska? What are we hearing about this grass?
Sure. So yeah, I'm getting a little more experience with Blonde Ambition in my own gardening skills adventures this summer. You know, generally we've tried some experiments to test out some of these native grasses and for these low maintenance, no mow kind of situations. And you know, blue grama more generally, it doesn't really hold up really well under a lawn situation. A turf, by definition, forms a contiguous community, but then also has to handle the traffic and the mowing. And that traffic and mowing doesn't seem to really, you know, the grass doesn't handle that part of the definition of a lawn. So it doesn't seem to be a great lawn grass. If you're looking for a native, you know, the buffalo grass is a much more safer bet for that low mow maintenance type of situation.
All right, use Blonde Ambition as sort of the accent.
Exactly.
All righty. All right, Amy, let's see. This is an Omaha viewer, and this particular swamp white oak started as 2 seedlings, and then the trees apparently did the included bark thing, and 2
Okay.
have become 1. He's never seen this before. Looks like foam, and he says it has gnats and butterflies hanging around. What is it?
Well, on the good side, I probably wouldn't lean toward a disease issue. With the moist weather that we've been having, it's just natural weeping of the tree. It has too much water and it's trying to release some of that water. But when it's doing that, there's also some sugars with it. And that's what the butterflies are attracted. They're like,
Yep.
oh, I have a great buffet sitting right here. And so they're just eating off all that sugar, which is a good thing because we can come with some secondary fungal infections that isn't going to hurt the tree, but they can be black and gross and disgusting. And most people don't like those. So you're actually better off having the butterflies and the flies eating on it. And once we start getting into dry weather, that weeping is going to stop. So nothing to worry about.
All right, although it's odd looking.
It is.
All right, this is a viewer, let's see, from Raymond,
Okay.
Kelly. She has onion plants. She says they always start out looking great, then the stems get weak and then they don't grow. It's been an ongoing problem. She did plant in mid-April, obviously rainy. She wonders if she's planting too deep. Soil is good. She does fertilize. She puts grass clippings around the gardens, and she really wants this to stop happening.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an ongoing issue, and unless Amy has some ideas for disease, the one thing that I'm observing is, you know, the grass clippings in there, they're right up around the plant. And grass clippings can be a great mulch, but you want them to dry down. You want to keep them away from the stem of the plant, and you only want them to be about 1 inch to 2 inches deep. So it may be holding too much moisture around that onion plant. So they may want to give that a try to see if it will help. The other thing she'd mentioned, planting too deep. You're supposed to plant sets about 1 inch deep. So just make sure you're planting about 1 inch deep, and just, you know, watch the water and keep it consistently moist without it being too dry or too wet. Sorry, and then not letting it get really, really dry and then really wet. Those are the only things I can suggest, unless anybody else has experience.
If you're seeing flopping, we can end up with neck rot.
Right.
It's a fungal infection, and so that will make them to kind of flop over too. The easiest way to know if you have neck rot is when you split open that bulb. If you see any discoloration in those scales, they're going to turn brown, mushy. that's the neck rot moving down into that bulb and into the scales. And that does impact long-term storage.
It'd be interesting to know if they flop over but continue to develop,
Yeah.
or if they just stop development once they flop
Yeah.
over.
We'll see if she'll send us a follow-up question on that. Thanks. Well, it's midsummer, and you've probably gotten into the habit of mowing your lawn on a regular basis. It's a good time to take a look under that mower and see if it needs some management. For our green and growing tip, here's Jeff Culbertson to tell us how to keep that mower going.
Well, it's midsummer, you've been mowing all summer and all spring, and now it's a good time to take a look at our lawnmowers to make sure that we're still in good shape with our equipment, and we want to reassess the height that we're mowing our grass right now at home. So whether you're mowing bluegrass or fescue, these things apply. With our lawnmowers, if you haven't checked the oil, you haven't had it serviced, you might want to consider that. We've got the hottest part of the year, and our equipment runs better if it's in good running condition. Our mower blade, if you haven't sharpened it recently, it's good to have it sharpened or sharpen it yourself. Take a look at your grass. If it's being torn instead of cut cleanly, torn grass is going to have more issues with disease and insects and just overall stress, so we want to watch that. With our mowing height, most of us are mowing probably 2.5 inches tall. We want to bring that up to at least 3.5 inches. By increasing the height, we allow the ground to be a little bit cooler. Again, it's less stressful for the turf, and we have fewer issues with disease and insects going into the rest of the summer.
A sharp blade and an engine that's been cared for will not only save you headaches later, but it will help keep your lawn a little bit more disease-free. I'm not such a one for managing that mower, I'm afraid to say, Bill.
Change the oil occasionally.
I do change the
All right,
oil.
that's an important thing.
Okay, Fred, we have a question for you. This is a Lincoln viewer. They think they have squash vine borers destroying their summer squash and acorn squash. Good hygiene. They did plant in a container, but then they watched for eggs under the leaves, but they still got borers. So is this borers? Is this
Okay,
bugs?
so there's two insects that attack our squashes.
Yep.
Well, there's more than that. There's cucumber beetle too. We won't talk about that one. So there's a squash bug and the squash vine borer, right? And these are two totally different insects. Squash. The second part of the question, this with the eggs underneath in the veins. Okay, that would be squash bug. All right, and they put in the little veins. They have these little tiny lens-shaped eggs. Squash vine borer, all right, is actually a clear-wing moth that flies around in the garden, and this insect lays its eggs on at the base of the stem of the squash plant, and then when the eggs hatch, a borer goes in and tunnels in the stem. So we're going to treat them in sort of the same kind of way. For the squash vine borer, what we're going to need to do is make sure that we have the insecticide, and there's really no good organic way to control them, to treat the base of the plant. So right down where the stem goes into the ground and the bottom couple of inches is a good way. And again, if those plants start to die down, just put some soil over them, and often they'll recover. For the squash bug, the other one, again, one of the things you can do is they'll have all these little gray nymphs, is just sort of tap them off into some soapy water, put down some shingles or some boards, and they'll crawl under there, and then you can scoop them up, or you could treat them with something like bifenthrin or permethrin or Sevin or one of the insecticides.
All right, thank you, Fred. Okay, Bill, this is a Walt Hill, Nebraska viewer.
Okay.
And their lawn is being taken over by white clover. They don't really mind it, but apparently have not seen this before. They're just kind of wondering why.
It seems like we're having a lot of clover issues around the state. Even well-managed lawns are having issues with clover, and so a lot of that's probably from the moisture that we had earlier on, the wet soils. Clover can handle that, and so they probably prospered a little bit. The grass is growing pretty vigorously, so we always talk about trying to promote vigorous growth. But this spring, most situations we had a lot of vigorous growth. but it just seemed like that it was just ideal conditions for the clover. It's a perennial, and so the best time to really treat it is going to be in the fall, maybe successive applications, because it's hard to really knock that thing out. But if it's shady and it's wet, clover is going to take over. And sometimes you just gotta embrace that. You know, if it's shady and wet and grass isn't growing, clover can work pretty well.
All right, thank you, Bill. Amy, this is an Omaha viewer that has one of the spireas called Snow Mound. And it has started developing dead spots, and they're kind of all a whole branch is
okay.
dead. Some are beginning to appear now that they've even cut more back. He wonders if it's insect. He's calling it spirea cancer. And so he's wondering if we can help him out with that one.
You could be dealing with a canker, but you could also be dealing something with the crown itself. With how wet it was, we could have had some crown rot development that could be moving up. We can also run into a little bit of verticillium wilt into spireas. So there isn't a lot you can do. There isn't a fungicide application that you can really do for your spirea. Continue to cut out those dead spots, maintain watering, general health for the spirea, and it may just be a bad year. If we go back next year and we have a dry year, you may not see a single issue with that spirea. So just continue what you're doing.
All right, and that one actually I think is also susceptible to fire blight.
Okay.
So same thing, cut that one out.
Cut it out.
Okay, Kelly, this is a viewer who purchased butterfly bushes a couple years in a row and loses them every winter and wonders what they can do to not have that happen.
So Buddleia is what they're
Buddleia,
talking about.
yep,
Okay, they're
yep.
talking about Buddleia. And gosh, mine usually come back, and I'm in Columbus. Did it say where they're from?
Norfolk.
Norfolk. Well, that's a little bit further north. A little bit further north, but not that much further north. You know, I guess the key point I would say is, are you sure you're losing them? Because Buddleia are very slow to come back in the spring. And it's a good idea to mark the location, and I would give them till the end of May before I would decide that they, you know, are not coming back and returning. So then the other thing would be, I guess, just keep trying and look for ones that, I don't know if there's any zone 4 Buddleia or not, but, you know, zone 4 would be ideal for Norfolk, but at least zone 5, and plant them in a somewhat protected location, mark them, and good luck.
And don't plant them in the fall.
Right, that's a good point, Kim.
Well, our garden is just beautiful this year, and our flowers are bursting with color. Before we go to break, let's take a minute to visit the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, you can see our flowers are in full bloom. Our All-America Selection winners are really doing their job as being winners. There's lots of color. The Master Gardeners have done a great job in designing and making sure that the reds and oranges and pinks are all kind of blending together. All of the pollinators are going right after all those colors, so the flowers are looking great. We're actually also preparing to get our fall garden going. We have a few extra days that we can probably get an extra crop of green beans in if you really wanted to extend that green bean season. And we're looking at some of those cool crops. We're gonna start putting those in probably around the 1st of August to the 15th of August for our fall crops. That's what's happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden this week.
We need to take a short break, but stay with us. We've got the plant of the week and the lightning round coming up right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. Once again, this is a taped program, so we won't be answering your calls tonight. Later on in the show, though, Amy shows us a bacterial spot on her pepper plants. Right now, time to start the lightning round. A minute on the clock, starting with Kelly. Are you ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready.
All right. We have a viewer who got a Norfolk Island pine for Christmas, and they want to know, is it hardy? Can they put it outside in their landscape?
Nope, keep it indoors.
All right. We have a lot of people who say their trees are growing really quickly this year. Can summer pruning happen on those trees without causing damage?
You can prune trees June and July. Do not prune them after August 1st, though.
All right. People are saying their apples are still dropping off their apple trees. What's happening and how can they get it to stop?
Probably some natural fruit drop because there was a very heavy fruit set, but some of them may not have been pollinated fully either with all the rain that we had.
All right. We have a viewer that has the new autumn fire sedum, but it's completely opening up and flopping over. What do we suppose is happening there?
Okay, well, it's growing too fast, all the rain. So, excuse me, or it can do that any year. So what you want to do when they're about 6 inches to 12 inches tall, chop them off in half. And they'll look really bad for about 2 weeks, but then they'll be beautiful and it'll reduce flopping.
All right. Can viewers top dress their gardens now with compost? Is that an okay thing to do?
Yes, it should be fine.
All right. Nice job, Kelly. Are you ready, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. We have a lot of viewers who are saying they're finding mushrooms in the mulch in their landscape now. Are these harmful? Should they worry about this? What's going on?
Most of them are non-harmful. Don't eat them. If you don't like them, pick them and throw them away. All they're doing is breaking down all that mulch.
All right. Lots and lots of questions about streaking in the foliage of daylily leaves. Is that disease-based?
Actually, I've been looking at a sample personally. Some of it is actually coming from a crown rot because it was too wet this spring and the crown is rotting out. So see how wet it is, if that crown's smushy or not.
All right. How do you control powdery mildew in peonies, or do you need to?
Typically, I don't recommend control of powdery mildew. Just good air circulation most of the time.
All right. We have viewers who say their squash continues to rot on the blossom end.
You have blossom end rot. The other thing is sometimes we run into pollination issues. Just remember to keep removing them, no overhead irrigation. You can apply a fungicide application, but typically pre-harvest interval is 7 to 14 days. Don't recommend it.
All right. Nice job. Amy. You ready, turf guy?
I'm ready.
These are all weed
Let's do
questions.
it.
So
Oh,
you're
no.
toast. Okay, we have a viewer with a buffalo grass lawn, and they stopped mowing it, and they wonder if they start mowing it now, is that going to hurt the vigor?
No, shouldn't.
Okay.
Oh, you don't scalp it.
Okay, all right. We have several people are saying they had nimblewill last year in their lawn, and they're starting to see what they think is the same thing again. Is that easy to control, or when do you control?
It's not easy to control. Let's leave it there.
Is there a season for control, for question number 3?
For nimblewill, it would be now because it is still a warm season grass, and so when the first frost comes, it's going to die off.
All right. A Northeast Nebraska viewer wants to know whether August 1st is too soon to seed bluegrass.
In Northeast Nebraska, it's probably still just a little bit early. Maybe even a week later would be good.
Okay. We have a viewer who wondered whether K31 is a broadleaf weed or is it a grass?
It is a grass. It is tall fescue, the forage type, and it looks horrible, so don't have it in your seed mixes for your lawns.
Okay, but also don't try to kill it with a broadleaf weed killer.
Yeah, you're not going to be successful. It would just be a waste of money.
Okay. All right, are you ready, Fred?
I'm ready.
Is it still time to treat for grubs, or are we too late?
We're really pushing the outer end of the envelope, but you probably still could put on an application of merit.
Okay, lots and lots of questions about Japanese beetles. Can they be trapped? Is there a systemic?
Well, there are traps, but it's usually good for monitoring. Again, you're going to treat them just like any other annual white grub, so the time to control the grubs would be right now or a little bit sooner. For the adults, there's some systemics you can put on the trees. It'll be translocated up and kill the adult beetles.
All right, there's bluish black wasps all over some of the mint plants. Are those good guys?
Yeah, they're good guys. Yeah, those are called cricket hunters. And again, it's one of the wasps, and they're busy doing their own thing. They're important pollinators. Leave them right where they are.
All right. What are the large green beetles flying around the apple trees right now?
Oh, those are green June beetles, and you'll see them pick up in the next, as the season progresses. Again, they aren't harming the tree in any way. They feed on fermenting fruit. So pick up the drops.
Okay, excellent. Nice job, all. Okay, Kelly, what do we have for plant of the week?
Okay, the plant of the week here, the yellow one is Cheyenne Spirit Coneflower. It's one of our All-American selections. It's kind of a shorter one, and can be mixed colors. There's yellow here, but there's also some orange, red, orange. Lots of flowers, and it'll grow from seed well, and it'll bloom that first year, seedling to bloom, so a good one to plant. The tall spike here is Agastache, or hummingbird mint, I believe is another common name of it. And this one is Blue Fortune. It's a very, very tall plant, about 4 feet, a perennial. And what's beautiful about it is it attracts lots of wonderful pollinators. So it'll be covered with lots of wonderful pollinators. So a plant that Fred would love.
I will. I do.
Beautiful. Yep, nice plants.
So good combination of blue and yellow and things that look nice in the middle of July. All right.
Which are few and far between.
This is true, including the people, because we're all hot. Okay, Fred, this next picture is for you, and this is a viewer who lives in Valparaiso.
Oh.
She has these insects making holes in the soil. She
Yeah.
watched other insects get pulled down in there by the buried insect. What's going on?
What wonderful image here. These are the pits caused by ant lions. And ant lions are a neuropteran insect the insect sits at the bottom of the pit. And when an insect comes along, the insect falls in, and the ant lion grabs it with these huge mandibles and just sucks it dry and then tosses it out. You know, they have a really cool way of doing that. When the insect drops in, the ant lion sits and kicks sand or the dirt up on the sides, which slide down, bringing the insect down, so it ultimately gets down to the bottom of the pit. Ant lions, important.
Doesn't even eat them; it just sucks them dry. And
Just sucks them dry and kicks out
And on that
the
note,
remains, as we would say in the forensic science business.
the remain.
okay, and on that note, we have a viewer who has this particular plant in their perennial bed. It's been there for years, Bill. It blooms really nicely. They wonder what it is, and is it a keeper?
That's a weed. It's a buckthorn plantain. Generally, you just pull it. The birds and rabbits like to eat it. So if you think it's a perennial or it looks nice, it is a perennial. It will stay there, but generally we'll just pull that plantain out in most gardens.
It's really aggressive, though.
And really pretty this time of year,
Yeah.
sometimes. Okay, Amy, Nebraska City viewer.
Okay.
Cucumber plant has developed spots on the leaves. Is this what you brought in for your
This is exactly
sample?
what I brought in. This is scabs. So avoid overhead irrigation. Don't really do much beyond that, and you'll still have a good cucumber crop this year.
All right, they really are ugly and spotty, though,
They
aren't
are.
they?
They are ugly.
Okay, Kelly, this is a viewer who has a hibiscus shrub, so sounds like Rose of Sharon. He's saying that the real issue with it is it generates hundreds of seedlings and hundreds of new plants, and he wonders, short of destroying the plant, is there a way to end it?
Okay, well that's unusual for a shrub Althea or Rose of Sharon, or which is a hibiscus, to produce that many seedlings. And I guess my thought is it coming from seed? Are they growy suckers that are growing off the roots? You know, the ones that are coming from seed, you can hand pull them, you can mow them if they're in the lawn. If they are coming from seed, you know, you could go in there. You know, this time of the year, I guess if you're careful, you could spot treat them with Roundup. But if there's turf grass there, of course, that's going to kill the turf grass, so you'd have to be careful. If they're suckers coming off the roots, which it may be hard to tell, then you may not want to use a herbicide because that could kill the Rose of Sharon. It might be, I don't know, it's hard to say. Maybe it was planted too deep. Maybe it's stressed for some reason. It's a little odd that you have all those seedlings.
And he's lucky because most people can't keep him alive over the winter, the big shrub. Well, with all the rain we got this summer in many places in Nebraska, it was probably inevitable that some diseases would be alive and well in our vegetable gardens. For our second feature tonight, Amy helps us keep bacterial spot from ruining our crop of peppers.
Bacterial spot on peppers is a disease that we can run into occasionally throughout years, but for 2015, it's been a real problem. It is a bacterial disease that is actually seed transmitted. So when you start your own peppers in the house, you don't even know they're infected until after we get them transplanted into the garden and once temperatures start getting a little warmer. We don't see symptoms development, which include brown lesions, water soaked, and those lesions will continue to grow. The leaves are going to turn yellow, and we're actually going to have death of that leaf completely. But those symptoms, as I was stating, don't show up until we're at temperatures typically between 70 and 80 degrees. So it may not be until the middle of May to the beginning of July, depending on the weather, before we start seeing that disease development. Once we have disease development starting to show up in our peppers, the foliage is the first area that we see it, and it can spread very, very quickly throughout the garden. It's going to be rain splashed or above irrigated water splashed. The garden that we're in today actually is using all soaker hose situations, so the spreading is actually coming from the frequent rains that we've been experiencing this summer, and that's what's moving the bacteria from plant to plant and leaf to leaf. The bacteria is just going to enter the plant through the natural openings of those leaves. As it starts to infect, as I already stated, we're going to get those brown water-soaked lesions that will continue to grow and spread throughout the plant material. Now, once we start getting fruit development, those spots can also develop on the fruit. So they're going to be a raised cankery type disease that develops on those fruits. In general, if you're able to get any fruit production from these plants, it's very limited because of the loss of foliage, the stress on the plant overall. So how do we manage it overall? We're going to be trying to avoid overhead irrigation whenever possible. When you start seeing initial symptoms, removing those leaves as quickly as possible. And if we need to, completely removing that plant so we're not getting transmission to the rest of the garden and the rest of the peppers in that plant. It will overwinter from year to year in the soil, so you're going to make sure you do good crop rotation within the garden. If you can do 1 to 2 years without peppers in the same location, will be very helpful. The other trick is, since it's seed transmitted, you need to make sure you're using good, reliable seed, and the seed package should be able to state if it is disease-free to begin with, and those might be options you want to look for in the future if you keep running into this issue. The other trick I forgot to mention when we're looking at crop rotation is this disease will actually move into tomatoes too. So when we look at crop rotation, it isn't just we want to avoid peppers, we want to avoid tomatoes in the exact same area also, so the bacterial disease won't move to the tomatoes and you continuously have this issue year in and year out. With that, we are going to try to manage bacterial spot as best as we can. If your garden gets way too succumbed, you may have to stick with buying your peppers from local farmers market for that summer and try to grow peppers again next year.
Start with resistant varieties and stay away from overhead watering. And if this spot still manages to show itself, you're going to have to do some roguing out and buy them at farmers market. All right, Fred, you get the next picture question. This is a Syracuse viewer, and she has something attacking her rhubarb. She wonders whether she needs to spray, and if so, with what?
Okay, so this looks like slug damage on rhubarb, and normally we think of slugs getting into hostas, and where they can do a lot of damage. But this looks like slug damage. Again, the best way is there's a bait called it's metaldehyde. It's called Sluggetta, and that you can purchase. And again, you sprinkle that underneath the hostas, and it will control the slugs. The other thing that's important is to try to let it dry out underneath the rhubarb. So pull away the deep mulch, and let it dry out a little bit, because slugs, snails require very moist conditions to produce eggs and new slugs or snails. So again, using a bait and letting it dry out underneath is probably the best approach.
All right, thank you, Fred. This is a Carney viewer, Bill, and started a new garden plot that seems to be a home to a lot of this weed. We kind of scratched our heads over it, but it has a waxy feel. She did say a liquid weed killer seems to run right off, and she did use Trimec in this garden on the bindweeds. So
Yeah, we thought about this. We all kind of struggled, and what we think it may be is a milkweed plant that's been probably deformed due to the application of that Trimec. And so, milkweed's great for pollinators, for monarch butterflies. And so, if you need to take it out, you could pull it. But otherwise, if you can keep it in your garden, actually something we should try to keep in our gardens for those butterflies.
All right, thank you, Bill. Amy, this is a sumac. And it has a couple of issues going on with it. I think one of them is they wonder if this is mildew on the foliage. And I think they also there were some dark sunken spots on a couple of the canes.
On the canes.
Like that.
So on the canes itself, sumacs are susceptible to those wonderful fungal cankers. Again, that's what we're seeing, that tissue is starting to die. You're going to slowly see death of that branch. Just prune those out as the season progresses, or wait until this fall. The white powdery stuff you're seeing on the leaves is powdery mildew. With the high humidities that we're starting to get, it's notorious for powdery mildew to be showing up. Once again, fungicide application isn't necessary. We can get some premature defoliation. When you're pruning out those canker areas, making sure you're getting good pruning of the sumac so we get good airflow in there will definitely help reduce the amount of powdery mildew that we will experience from year to year.
All right, thank you, Amy. All right, Kelly, this is a Gretna viewer, and they have an October Glory maple, which is one of the red maples. It's done really well in the past. This year they're seeing the dead top and several dead branches throughout. They're wondering how to go about pruning it, especially since one appears to be the central leader.
Okay, well, another one of those tree questions. We have numerous ones this year. And to address their pruning question, you just want to go in there. If you want to try to save it, then go ahead. You want to prune the dead branch back to where it's attached either to the trunk or to another main branch that's healthy. And I would get that done, here in June or July. I said earlier to not prune after August 1st, and that's simply because when we prune on plants after August 1st, they sometimes put on new growth that won't harden off before winter. So that's the reason for that. I guess they didn't ask why it might be dying back, but gosh, it could be anything from verticillium wilt to a canker to just that cold temperature we had last November that we're blaming on a lot of things.
All right, thank you,
And when they
Kelly.
prune, don't treat the wounds with anything. The tree it's lost its central leader,
Right.
So you really have to evaluate whether it's going to be a tree worth keeping. It's pretty young. It's not a large tree, so maybe one of those other branches can be, will turn into a central leader down the road. But evaluate it closely and decide whether maybe you want to replace it with a tree that will have a central leader.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Well, we have a couple of announcements of things going on in the gardening world, and the first, I believe, is the Greater Omaha Iris Society sale, Friday, July 24th, 2 to 8 p.m. at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, and we have a URL on the screen for our viewers for that one. Our second one is also an iris sale, and this is the Rhizome sale, and that is Saturday, August 1st here in Lincoln, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at St. Andrews, and we have a number on the screen for that one. So those of you who love iris, this is your opportunity. We have just a couple minutes left, panels. So Fred, a quick question here. This is a viewer that says their tomatoes are covered with half-inch black beetles chewing on the leaves. What are they and how do you get rid of them?
Those are blister beetles, probably. And again, they really aren't much of any concern. They won't do a lot of damage. You could treat them with something like Sevin or permethrin if you wanted to. I would just enjoy them. Again, it's not one you want to pick up and handle because it does have a toxin in it, but it's not going to cause serious injury to the tomatoes.
All right, just to the people. Okay.
If you hit 'em.
Bill, this is, we don't know where this viewer is from, but they're wondering about whether Roundup is safe to use for killing bluegrass that has encroached into their landscape beds, or is there a herbicide that is better?
Roundup will kill the bluegrass, but you have to be really careful with Roundup this time of year. It's hot, it can volatilize, which means it can go into the air. And so when it's hot, it goes into the air and it can easily drift into your ornamentals and other plants that you don't want to kill. So I'd be really careful with any herbicide control this time of year. Let's wait till the fall, especially when your garden starts to shut down.
All right. Amy, we have a Lincoln viewer who says they have a weeping mulberry that is 4 years old that has developed yellow and spotted leaves. Anything to be concerned about with mulberry?
I have seen a few fungal leaf spots on mulberries, not real common. Wouldn't worry about it too much. It could just be 2015.
And I think we're seeing the same thing on things like hackberry and
We're seeing really bizarre things this year because it's been so wet and cool.
and now that it's dry and maybe drier,
starting
and
to
who
shed a
knows
few.
what's going to happen in the
Starting to
fall.
shed a few leaves.
All right.